was showing up. Yeah.
Okay.
Clicked on the link from.
Anyway, so for everyone who's just rocked up, welcome to BrisPHP Q3 of 2020, where this is the first meetup that we're kind of running hybrid with remote and in-person. So we've got a whole of 4 in-person attendees, one of whom is a speaker. So that's great. I think there are a few more coming, but it's been raining in Brisbane today, so maybe they've been held up. So make sure you go to this URL here, brisphp.com/pizza. It redirects to a Google form. You can input your email address, and then later in the episode, we're going to pull one or more than one out of a hat. I forget how many gift vouchers we have to give away. I think it's like 15 or 20 to give away. And it's kind of in lieu of not having pizza and drinks for our 4 attendees. It would have been a wild night if we had pizza and drinks here for 4 people. I don't think, we'll do a quick shout out to our sponsors. We've got Neto e-commerce, who are currently hosting us and streaming and managing all of that for us, which is great. We've got Credit Sense as well, also in Brisbane, and Info Exchange. All of us kind of work together to organize this and to get speakers and to keep it up and running, which is great. So I guess we'll just jump straight into the talk about what's new in PHP. So for anyone who's first time, if this is your first time at BrisPHP, I give a talk about what's new in PHP, and that says Q3. Do I have the right slides up?
Yeah, you've got the wrong link that you've just posted twice.
No, this is the slides I wrote last night. Apparently, I just forgot to change that 3 to a 4. Right. So we'll just skip past that, pretend it didn't happen. So the great news is PHP 8 is going to be here in, I hope my maths was right when I wrote this at 10 o'clock last night, 9 days, on the 26th of November. So it's been in feature freeze for a while. So there's not that many new features since I last presented what's new in PHP. If you want to check out other new features, you can go to my blog or to GitHub, where there's links to my previous slides, which run through all of the new features kind of in the order that they were accepted. So far, there hasn't been any new features accepted for PHP 8.1, but there are quite a few open RFCs that are being discussed and voted on and whatnot. So look forward to hearing about them next time. In other news, PHP, that should be a 2, just FYI, 7.2 dies in 13 days. This is what I get for writing slides at 10 o'clock at night. So the crazy thing is that 7.2 is just, it won't have any security support as of, I think that's the 30th of November, where that gets dropped. So if you're on older than PHP 7, I feel for you, I really do. And if you're on PHP 7, the upgrade to 7.3 and 7.4 is quite easy. Maybe 7.1 was a bit hard. It's been a while since I did that one, but I know getting from 7.1 through to 7.4 was quite straightforward. So there shouldn't be really too much holding you back. So the new attributes, or annotations, as you might know them in other languages, has kind of broken a record in PHP land. It's had 4 different accepted RFCs that have all kind of like modified the previous RFCs. And then even before that, there was like 3 or 4 other RFCs which were rejected over the last 6 or 7 years. So a quick recap, they brought in annotations, and then they had updates to annotations to allow you to group them. So like this, for instance, here is an example of a grouped annotation where you only need this like annotation syntax once, but you've got 2 different annotations in here. Then there was another RFC to change the annotation syntax. It used to be like 2 angle brackets, like less than, and then greater than on the end, but that looked like incredibly gross. So they changed it and they made it double @, which the main reason for that was because it looks like annotations in Java and many other languages. But what they didn't account for was the @ is already a token in PHP. It like suppresses errors. So it was actually harder to implement that than they originally thought, even though they did end up implementing it. They just had to change the way that like tokens were parsed and stuff, but eventually got there. But by the time they got there, someone had raised another RFC to change the syntax again because they didn't like the at syntax, mostly because there was no closing part of the syntax. Like you can see here, we've got a closing square brackets to say this annotation is now closed. The at syntax didn't have a close thing, which is kind of inconsistent with most other language properties in PHP. Also, if you have a single line annotation like this, this will render as a comment in older versions of PHP. So it's theoretically possible to have annotations in your code and run that code on previous versions of PHP. Obviously, assuming you don't use any other like newer features, like if you typed these variables or something like that, then that would not work. So I don't know how much value that actually provides, but it was cited as an upside. So that'd be cool if people could do that. And I think there was another, the other one was people originally wanted double @ signs so that like potentially in future we could like change it to a single @ sign to be consistent with other languages, but that's never going to happen because then you have to change the error suppressant one as well. So that was kind of a pie in the sky idea. We also have, oh man, no, wait, never mind, I'm good. I'm second guessing myself. So we also have a new match expression in PHP 8, which replaces switch expression. It's kind of like the grown-up big brother of a switch statement. So a switch statement has a few downsides. The main one being that this is not, this condition is subject to type coercion. So if you put a bool in there, it can be coerced to a string or an int or whatever you need, depending on like what your case statements are. Other downsides include having to put a break statement everywhere. And if you forget the break statement, then you get fall throughs. And you can also have, potentially you have a different token in this that doesn't match against any of your case statements. And if you don't have a default, then you're technically not handling everything. So match expression kind of fixes all of that. The condition doesn't allow for type coercion, and it actually throws an exception if you don't include a case. Like if there was like a different token in here that doesn't match any of these, and you also forgot the default, then you get a runtime exception when it runs. And as you can see, you don't need breaks or anything. It's just a single case to a single expression that gets executed. So it's kind of cool. And it won by an overwhelming majority in the votes. So hopefully you can use it. Another cool thing that came out was named parameters. For anyone familiar with Python has named parameters, and I'm sure many other languages do. That's the one that comes to mind though. You can now call a function, and you can, when you're passing in this parameter, you can use its name as well instead of just the position. So you'll notice with HTML special chars here, this double encode parameter comes after these two other parameters, which if you don't care about them, you have to then go look up HTML special chars, figure out what the default parameters are, and then put them in your code as well, and then hope the defaults don't change in the future. But with named parameters, you can just kind of skip those over. It also makes your code more readable. Like if you just have like a random false flag here, you have no idea what that is unless you like add a comment in your code, or I know PHP Storm will like automatically put like a name in front of that for you to try and solve that issue. But now you can just put in your put in the name there, and it kind of solves that. It gives you a lot of flexibility around doing things like value objects and like DTOs and things like that have lots of parameters in like their constructor, and you can skip a bunch of them that have defaults and things like that. Keeping in mind, you can only skip parameters that have defaults, and you can't, once we've used a named parameter, we can't go back to passing in positional parameters after this because that doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like having a, like if you have like a parameter that like doesn't have a default after one with a default, doesn't make any sense.
Does that throw a syntax error if that one code is not a parameter name, or if you were to change the parameter name?
Yeah, you'll get a runtime error there.
Runtime or syntax?
I'm not actually certain.
Okay.
For anyone on the stream that didn't hear the question was, do you get a syntax error if you put in the wrong name here, or if that doesn't exist? I'm not actually sure if it's a syntax error or a runtime error. It's probably a syntax error. I did see there is a caveat to this, and the caveat is if you have an interface that defines functions with parameter names, and then you have implementations of that interface, in your implementations, you can change your parameter names without getting syntax errors or runtime errors. But if something is calling calling that implementation and using named parameters, then they will get runtime errors when they're running. So there's that's a bit of a toss up. I don't particularly like that caveat myself, but so I'm assuming that you get syntax errors, but I can't particularly remember. So that's all the new features that came out in PHP 8 since the last talk. So it's going to be great updating to it in the coming days. The next thing that was released recently is Laravel 8. They have quite a few new features. I've just got a couple of the kind of bigger, cooler ones in here. One of them is job batching. So you can launch these background jobs that you want to happen, and they happen asynchronously. And then you can use this then, catch, finally syntax to kind of catch errors and to always close off your things that you close, like database connections and file handles and things like that. It's nice to be able to run these all asynchronously, and then you can have code that runs after all of them are finished. So it's kind of like an await all something in JavaScript. Laravel also has model factories, which are often used in tests. So you can instantiate a bunch of models at a time. So this is kind of how it works pre-Laravel 8. You have to define your factory like this, and then you can call it like this, which allows you to quickly make 3 users. And then you can also pass in emails and remember me tokens and things like that. Everything that you've defined here, you can pass in this syntax here when you're creating the users. This has been revamped in Laravel 8, so now you can do it with classes. So you define your factory as a class like this, and then you can use this syntax here to create your users. So the main difference is the way it's defined, which is a lot nicer. But then you can also, without having to use this global factory method, you can just use this static function as well. And the final thing is Composer 2, which I talked about in the last meetup, but now it has been completely released. And these are some benchmarks that our composer's been citing around. Its main improvement is just a dramatic speed improvement over previous composers, Composer 1 being the only previous composer. And the main reason that is because they parallelized all the downloads. So I know there's a couple of composer add-ons you can get at the moment. I forget their names, like Prezi or something like that. Prestissimo. Thank you, Ben.
What a name.
Yeah, I know. And they would help to parallelize all your downloads and speed it up. But now Composer 2 just does that out of the box. There's a couple of other features as well, but the main one is a speed improvement. So make sure you grab the new Composer 2. I think most frameworks now support it. I know there was a couple of issues earlier on in Symfony Land, but that was solved months ago before, while it was still in beta. But that's the end of my presentation. Do we have any questions?
Why are the other two so fast? Sorry, slow. Would you get it? Why is the speed improvement so much?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm assuming just because there's less things to install in Symfony, especially with Symfony 4 and Symfony 5, the skeleton, if you just create a Symfony app that's got barely any dependencies in it, whereas Drupal and Laravel are quite heavy at times. And once you've got something that's already this quick, there's only so much you can do to improve it.
Are you fat shaming Laravel?
Well, not as much as Drupal.
So is that Australian internet or American internet?
Yeah, if it was Australian internet, I'm sure we'd have to this is off by a factor of 100 or something, surely.
Yeah.
Is there any questions on the YouTube, Liam? The YouTube, I sound like a boomer.
Well, I'm checking the Wi-Fi's as well, and doesn't seem to be any questions. I've done a shout out again for the pizza vouchers, which is good, but no specific questions on the content. No, just letting it catch up because there's a little bit of a delay. So
Yeah, right. No worries.
it's fine.
Awesome. Well, we might. Tom, do you want to do the pizza vouchers now, or do we want to leave it open for longer? Cool. Well, let's get Liam. You're up for the next talk, I guess.
Okay. Yep. Let me share my screen. Let's have a look. Make sure I share the right one. Now, can I just check? Hopefully everyone can see that, and it's big enough text, because I have had problems in the past where it's sort of is a little bit too small depending on my screen size, because I've had to resize it. So hopefully that's good.
It's looking good on this end.
Okay, excellent. Okay, great. So I'll kick off. I'm going to do a shout out to my boss, Justin, who did a fantastic job of saying, hey, you could do this talk in a couple of weeks. And I know he's in the room and I know he's listening. So yeah, but it was good. It was a good reminder that we should sometimes talk about ways of working and not just some of the tech aspect of the way we do stuff. So the topic is ways of working at Neto. And I put it as a subtitle there, our challenge of finding the right thing to work on, which I'm sure is a common problem for a lot of people. So just first up, a little bit about me. So who am I? Liam Phelps, Software Development Manager here at Neto. I was planning to be in the office tonight, but some family stuff meant I decided to do this from home, so we get it done. So I've been at Neto since August of last year. Yes, so time has flown. Coming into the role, I had a great teams foundation. So I was a Scrum Master, worked with teams a lot over my career. But coming into Neto, there were some great foundations to rely on about how the teams are actually working. But I remember in the first week of starting, Justin, who's there, he said, now we need to do some kind of planning event for the next year. I said, excellent. What did you do last time? And he said, we went off site, we sat in a room and we came up with ideas, the nebulous ideas. And I said, okay, great. Where's the stuff from last year? It's somewhere on Google Drive. Awesome. In summary, yes, great foundations, but are we sure it's the right way to do stuff and sort of come up with those ideas? Not quite sure. So I'm going to ask you one thing to think about this. What's the message for today? So a little bit of a too long didn't read. What's the message I want to leave you with today? As we've found over the last probably 18 months here at Neto, unexpected opportunities can come up when you look at things a little bit differently. And that's what we did about 13 months ago. We started to look at our future thinking in a little bit of a different way. And that's what I'm going to explain today. So there it is. Unexpected opportunities come when you look at things a little bit differently. So first, a little bit about Neto and the technology department that I'm in with Justin. We are set up, so basically four little development teams, all cross-functional, and we build ourselves around the idea of being high leverage teams. So leverage equals impact divided by the effort. The more impact we can have with less effort, or we can make with less effort, the more effective will be overall, right? So in order for us to do that, we need to ensure we've got our teams empowered and remove obstacles. And remember that, remove obstacles. That's a key little sentence there. So when we set up the teams, they have clear ownership of their part of the platform and the system. We like to give them and set them up to use repeatable patterns. And as an example, the teams are structured so they have a product owner, product manager, and a tech lead as well. So as an example of a repeatable pattern, how does a product manager run a beta program? We probably create a playbook for that or something, and then the other teams can use it. So very repeatable. We aim to give the teams a North Star. They need to know where we're going from a business and a technical perspective. So we give them a North Star and we facilitate objectives and sort of goal setting using OKRs. We have shared principles amongst the teams. So the teams and the functions agree what success looks like and what quality looks like. So whilst they are going on their own technical adventures, they have a shared understanding of what success and quality looks like. And we promote as much as possible the idea of experimentation technically and in your process, right, to encourage the idea of there should be no fear of failure, all right? We need the teams to be able to able and willing to experiment and take calculated risks, right? So we sort of recognize we won't find innovative, high leverage solutions unless the teams feel safe to explore the unknown. Okay, so that's sort of the underlying message and sort of feeling of the teams that we have. To bolster that kind of thinking, we encourage the teams to think very much outcome focused. And this has become even more prevalent and more needed for us since the COVID changes. So we're in an office together. We used to be, now we're fully distributed. So being outcome focused is more important than ever. Okay, so at the top, there's a couple of do's and don'ts there. I'm not going to read them all out. You can have a look at them. But we sort of have an understanding that when we start an initiative, it's important to focus on the desired outcome before you jump straight into solutions. Okay, by focusing on the problem to be solved, we ensure that all ideas are considered and that we're all working towards a common goal. All right, there are situations where teams can pair up and do some technical work. So they still use the same thing, the same approach. They think of it from a what's the desired outcome and then work a little bit backwards. Some very simple do's and don'ts, more rules of thumb that we sort of use internally. So a little bit more about the teams. As I said, we operate in four teams roughly, and this is just development teams, that is, about 2 pizza box size teams. I said before, they have a tech lead and a product manager or product owner, and they are supposed to work hand in glove. Okay, so technology and product working together. And they help guide the team on the journey to whatever initiative they're working on. Okay. The missing piece, and this is something that occurred to us last year when we were doing our planning, was we're very confident in how we've set the teams up to be successful. But we discovered when we go to, and I'll go to the next slide actually, because it's a little bit more interesting. This is a little bit about how we look at our delivery. Okay, so we've got on the left-hand side, we treat this as our engine, right? Very classic sort of double diamond approach, which my predecessor here at Neto helped develop. But we worked out that whilst it does make sense to do this once you've got some ideas and you've got some inputs, the challenge that we noticed is that how do we still know we're doing the right things? How do we actually get this discover piece done right? And not just from a product perspective, but from the team's enablement perspective. Okay, we had built the teams up. They're confident in this idea of diverging and converging on the right ideas to do the right things. We used OKRs, and we still do across the company. We use OKRs to sort of set those objectives and key results, but we still felt there was something a little bit missing, something that ties it together for the department to say, right, we've got all these teams, but actually where are we heading? Once we'd sort of settled on that, well, that started to change our way of thinking of how we would even come up with what is the future for the development teams, right? They've got their great initiatives for their product pillars, but how do they bring it together? And that's where we decided to try something different. I mentioned the offsite before that my boss Justin said, and they sat in a room and they built a list of stuff. I said, that's great, but how did they actually arrive at the actionable things? So we developed something called a Nirvana thinking workshop. And what that is roughly every 12 months, we decided to borrow a retrospective technique called a futurespective and use that to think about what would Neto technology like to feel like in 12 months' time. So we got together, we sat down and said, what would it feel like to be in Neto in 12 months' time? And assuming everything worked well, again, Nirvana, everything's working great. And we threw up a bunch of things up onto Post-its. This is pre-COVID. We're all in a room, typed together, Post-its going everywhere, pens. Okay. And that gave us a really good picture of what we all wanted to have the department feel like. And at the time, this was myself, the development manager, our chief technology officer, Justin there, chief product officer, and one of our engineering principals, David, as well. So we did that for a good half a day. The first half of the day was just coming up with what that looks like. And I think I've got a picture of it here. Yeah. So that was the end of the half day. Great, awesome, heaps of Post-its, everything's visualized. We did a little bit of affinity mapping. We grouped it, awesome. But then what? If that's what it looks like in 12 months, what do you do then? And we said, right, if it's that way in 12 months, and 12 months was arbitrary, it could have been 18 months, could have been 18 years for whatever we thought of. We thought, right, if that's what it feels like, let's take a quick break and think, what would we have to overcome to get to those areas? And I think we eventually digitized those Post-its there. We digitized it so we had a bit of a picture. So we had to mind map it because there was just so much there. So as I said, took a break, we came back and said, what obstacles would we need to get over? And that's why I said, remember before, those obstacles for the teams. So that's where we came up with our concept of obstacles and opportunities based on this idea of what the tech department would feel like in 12 months' time. And I think the next graphic has that. So as we drew this out, and if those go back to the previous Post-its, this was all of the great things that it would feel like in 12 months' time to be working in Neto development teams. Those represented the great aspects of it. What we then broke down, I don't have a picture of all the Post-its because we realized we lost them, but we digitized from memory. These were the obstacles that we knew we had to overcome to get to Nirvana, and then we mashed it with the opportunities. And the interesting thing that came out of it as we were mapping it together, and we had quite a few big sheets of paper and we tried to draw it together, there were ways that you could see the high leverage items, that it meant that if you wanted to remove this obstacle for the team, you would take care or attempt these couple of opportunities, whether it be a bit of documentation, a bit of experimentation with this technology, a change in approach to the way the team was looking at a particular problem. If you group them and link them, you could actually see the patterns occurring where you might say, right, we're going to take this opportunity and just one of these other opportunities here. And that would ripple out to a couple of other things which we knew were of value in our roadmap to Nirvana. And I think on the right here, this purple stuff, this was where we specifically created the block of high leverage teams. And in that discussion, one of the examples, we actually called out, we said we actually lacked a technical North Star. While each of the teams had great product North Stars, technically to get there, they didn't have that. So that became an opportunity. And we wrote a couple of bits and pieces around certain aspects of the platform about technically where we wanted to go. And that started to shape thinking. This first workshop was around about October last year. By around about January, we'd seen some of the teams experimenting with new technology based on a couple of markers that Justin and Ben Plunkett have put down about this is the kind of technology we should use to solve this problem. And that's then rippled through the other teams. Again, getting us towards the Nirvana idea. So that's heaps of stuff already, okay? So just looking at those graphics. What we realized a couple of days later, and it was Justin who brought me to this, we'd realized that we had stumbled upon something we'd never really tried before, and that was the mental model called inversion. And Justin had been reading a book at the time. He'd finished up a couple of days after the workshop. And he said, this is actually what we've done. We've done inversion. Now, the normal future-spective retrospective that I said we borrowed from, I mean, for folks who've been in plenty of retrospectives, you might have tried it before. It often asks you to think, a little bit ahead based on a project you've recently done, and you take some learnings and you make some process changes. Okay, that's the normal ways you would go through a retrospective using that model. But the thing that we'd sort of mesh this with was this model of inversion, where you think about your problems, your obstacles a little bit differently. So I think the next slide, no, I'll keep it here for a minute. Just imagine the purple ones there are the obstacles. We'd stumbled upon inversion by thinking about, right, if we know that these are the obstacles to us getting to these great ideas of nirvana, then we should change our thinking and think of it a little bit backwards. So we essentially reverse the questioning of how do we get over these obstacles. So what it enabled us to do was ask ourselves questions in a different way to solve these problems. So to give you an example, our natural mode of thinking, and many of the people in the room were engineers and developers who think a certain kind of way. We look for answers. What can I do to solve this problem? What should I do to achieve this outcome if we know the outcome because we've already spent some time on it? What strategy or process will help me get where I want to be? How can I succeed in a project? Those are typical natural ways to think. Reversing it uncovered a couple of things. So to give you an example, we asked ourselves, what events, behavior, or action can prevent me from solving this problem? What events or behavior can prevent me from achieving this outcome? And what gaps in strategy or process can stop me to get where I want it to be? All right, and that's on the assumption that we had worked out these great things about how it felt to work in teams. So, right, what are the things that are preventing me from getting there? And that uncovered a couple of interesting things, and that introduced more squiggly lines about how things interconnect. So that was exceptionally powerful for us to realize a couple of days later, because that then solidified that this isn't just an exercise of every 12 months building a list of ideas of cool things to do, or what we would like to try and be like, but it made us think about the challenges that we were facing in the teams. And I think on the next slide, I tried to describe this unintended benefit. So I talked about the idea of inversion and looking at our problems a little bit differently. But the second unexpected benefit was really alignment. So at the end of that first Nirvana session, where we sort of produced this large diagram, we produced a mind map, which we still refer to, alignment came where we were able to take that information and start a story and a discussion with the individual teams and the tech leads and the product managers, say, this is where we actually want to go, and here are the obstacles and some opportunities that we think we should tackle as a department. And that started a bit of a chain reaction where a couple of months later we did the same activity just with the tech leads and the PMs. And the flow on meant that when we come together maybe every 2 weeks for our all hands meetings, we would often refer back to some of these ideas. We did discover a problem a little bit later on where we hadn't actually documented much of it and shared it out, but we were consistently talking about the themes of Nirvana, the themes of high leverage teams. There's a couple in there about being people-centric and idea meritocracy, where we wanted people to share their ideas freely and experiment. So it kept this running theme through the last 12 months about we want to get to this point here. And last October, that's 12 months. So when we hit October last month, we had to do the same exercise. And a couple of new things shook out, right? If we look back at the opportunities and the obstacles that we spotted, we had actually achieved and overcome some of those, but new things had emerged, of course. So as a result of this, and we sort of shared it around the tech department, a couple of other departments in Neto started using it. So they borrowed the idea and they said, this actually works really well. We can use our OKRs and our process of OKRs to formulate some clear objectives and some key results to get us on the path. But how do you actually get those things, those ideas first? You can do it using this kind of technique. getting you to the point where you're looking at your problems a little bit differently shakes out a lot of other ideas. And some of these graphics here from the rest of our product team and a little bit from our support group as well. And they did the same practice. Obstacles and opportunities has worked really well for them. So back to that message, because I'm mindful of there's so much information here. I didn't want to run this too long. But the unexpected benefit is when you look at your opportunities just a little bit, unexpected opportunities, I should say, come from when you look at things a little bit differently. If we had just gone back to here and built a whole list of cool stuff, we might not have got the same kind of outcomes we have in the last year if we hadn't have gone back and thought, step back a little bit. What did we have to solve to get to this stage and this stage and this stage? And it's turned into one of those repeatable patterns that our teams are now relying on quite regularly. It's sort of coming into a process where we do it in conjunction with our OKRs, which are roughly every quarter. So yeah, that was it for me around how we try and do things at Neto. It's the technology department, I should say. Yeah.
That was really cool. Thanks, Liam.
No worries. Any questions there or on the YouTube? I was just going to the YouTube stream. Did the same as you, mate.
Do we have a question on the YouTube?
Is it like Tenet? I don't know what that is.
Is it like Tenet from YouTube? Do you know Tenet, Liam? Or if StarCraft?
You're on mute, Liam.
Or if StarCraft?
Sorry, guys, I'm on mute. It's not quite like Tenet. It's not quite a pincer movement, but it's a similar idea. If you get it to the point where you are thinking of the ways you can get over your obstacle, and even more so the behaviors about what's actually causing something, right? That was actually really powerful. There's another question here. Was it some of the new things that got added last month, Tom?
Yeah, that was a great guy called Tom. Yeah, he asked that in the chat.
A great guy called Tom, yeah. So I'll just go back. So a couple of things that actually got removed or sort of ticked off was actually more in the tech aspect. So I mentioned our North Star, our technical roadmap. That got removed or ticked off. Yeah, we feel a little bit better about that. Things that got added were actually much more team process oriented. So the 4 teams that I mentioned, as we progressed through the year, our understanding of how we manage our shared services had really evolved to the point where we said, no, we're pretty good in this area, but no, we need to add in some more things around, no, this is the right way we're going to manage our shared services. And some of the things came back into teams with a little bit more sort of firm ownership. So I think somewhere in here where we said empowered, where am I, customer centric? No, idea meritocracy, the one in the middle, talked a fair bit about shared services and ownership and accountability. That area actually had quite a few things added this last session where we said, no, we need to get a little bit more tighter in this area. We need to have a little bit more focus on some of the basic things that we felt we'd lost over a year. We got really excited about experimentation while letting a couple of other things sort of take a back seat. So come back to those ideas because it was detrimental to how robust are we at managing some of our services. Yeah.
Cool. We've got Robert was just asking in YouTube what a OKR is, if you could give like a quick 2-liner to explain that.
No worries. And this was one thing that I thought I could make a session about OKRs as well. So OKRs, objective and key results, objectives and key results. So if I go back a little bit, back here. So if you Google it, objectives and key results, a lot of thinking originally coming out of Google, they sort of institutionalized it themselves, but there was work done well before that. The idea is write your objective in a way that's going to really push you as a group, as a team, as a department. Where do you really want to strive for? Often it's a moonshot. Your key results are your indicators as to how you're actually going to get there. So a very simple example, a non-technical example, is objective. Have have a functioning and fruitful backyard garden. Okay. Key result: no more than 2 possum attacks across a month. Okay. So you have to actually do things to make that happen, right? You have to do stuff. You have to cover your garden. You have to put down possum repellent, whatever it might be. Second result, at least 3 tomatoes come off a plant in the month, right? So they're indicators, key results that tell you you are on your way to a self-sufficient and functional backyard garden. Okay, putting a tech spin on that, it's very easy to then say, right, as a product objective, you can say we want to have XYZ in the market by a certain amount of time. A key result might be the technical things you have to action, but it's very risky to sort of, dicey to not make it just a list of things to do. There need to be results that come out of your actions to get you to the objective. So again, I think I could have turned a second presentation about OKRs and what we've learned in that process. I think, Justin, you've spoken about it at a couple of different workshops too.
Do we have any questions from the room? Just for anyone on YouTube, we now have 10 attendees live in the room. So just it's grown from 4. But none of them have questions. So
Did that session come first, or did OKRs come first?
OKRs were first.
How do they kind of leverage each other?
Yeah. So OKRs came first. And prior to that, another method called V2 MONs we used. They are all frameworks to really help you visualize and be very specific about what you want to achieve. Okay. And they work well. The catch with it, again, was how do we make sure it's the right thing to do? And there's plenty of articles out there about the traps of OKRs and the benefits. But yeah, for the tech department, OKRs and sort of before that were V2 MONs. Yeah, they came first.
Awesome. Thanks, Liam. There's unless there's any more questions on YouTube, we might move on.
All good.
All good.
Stop the hearing.
All right. Do you want to do the giveaway now, Tom?
We'll do it at the end.
Right at the end? All right. Well, now we're up for... Oh, no. What have I done? I don't know how to use this computer. Now we're going to have Sam Levy talking about accessibility for the backend. I need to share my screen. I forgot that. Oh. There you go.
Now I need to figure out how
Welcome.
to use the computer too.
All
right. So I'm going to stand down a little bit. I will preface this by saying I am not an accessibility expert in any way, shape or form. This came around after I watched a couple of talks on accessibility, and I wondered what it looks like in terms of the back end of a system. And I went searching and I went asking, and that was a few months ago. And this is kind of a thrown together talk about what I found. I wrote these slides at about 10:30 on Friday night, and I haven't looked at them since. So we're going on an adventure together. So there's a lot of talks that I've seen about front-end accessibility. Everyone seems to know the things like there's a whole bunch of ARIA properties, writing semantic HTML, making sure you're paying attention to color contrast, using alt tags and title tags and all sorts of alternative descriptions. There's a lot that has already been said about it, and pretty much it comes down to people who aren't like me may need to use this, which I think pretty much sums it up and also puts everyone to sleep. It's not a popular, it's a popular talk topic because it's not popular within people, with people who actually have to do this stuff. It's not well understood. It's really hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand what is and is not a problem. And yeah, it kind of just gets glazed over and puts a lot of people to sleep, and they kind of go, oh, well, it'll do it good enough. So when I was thinking about this, I thought about people have to use this who don't look and behave and perceive the world like I do. And I came to the realization that not all users are users. I am a user of many pieces of code that I write, even if I never touch the interface. The fact that I am interacting with the code, I'm interacting with the servers and the systems, I am still using that system. Even people who don't use the interface and don't touch the code might still be looking at log files and stuff. They're all users of the system. And it's important to make sure we're not excluding people from being able to use the system. So, does it matter? No one on the team has any issues. So does it matter? It'll take a lot of extra time to start thinking about this, and it won't make the code run faster or things convert better. Doesn't fit with my chosen code style. And this is the biggest thing that I came across when I started asking about it is low vision developers already have the tools in place. And yeah, they are some great videos out there if you want to go looking about low vision developers using screen readers and how they interact with the IDEs, and you can see them do some bloody amazing things just through being able to hear without being able to see a single line of code that they write. People don't always have access. Oh, that's great. How do we move this little?
Just be able to drag it.
Okay, I'm just going to put it over there
you can
now.
minimize it with the thing.
Okay,
Dash.
I don't need to see me. Yeah. People don't always have access to all of their tools. If you're having to debug something in prod, you might be sitting in an SSH session with Vim. I don't know if your screen reader will read that. If you're having to dig through log files to find where everything went to hell, your tools may not help. You know, so this whole low vision developers already have the right tools. Sometimes they may not, and that's not their fault. Oh, I'm going to click on. Who got a Mac? All right. Your current team won't be the only teams that will ever consume your code. This goes especially for the people who work on work with systems like Neto and Squiz and systems where parts of it have public consumption of the code. So whether that's paid customers through an API or something else, you're not going to be the only people who ever touch your code and your backend systems and everything else. You have to start thinking about the fact that not all developers look like you and behave like you and can see and can hear and can do all the things that you can do. Your chosen code style was chosen. You can always choose a different one. It may look uglier, but you may find, especially for public code, it might be worth picking an uglier code, an uglier style, which is more accessible. But yeah, it's a choice you made. It's not something that's going to break the world if you choose to change it. And you don't want to artificially limit your market. You don't want to annoy or exclude people who may well need or want to use your system. You may have an excellent developer who comes along who can't access your code properly, and they will struggle, and you're not going to get the best out of them. You just don't want to, you know, limit things if you can avoid it. So I went searching for some research and searching, and I looked at WCAG. I looked all over the internet, kept looking and looking, and WordPress. Surprisingly, WordPress. WordPress is one of the few places I've seen and come across that directly addresses this idea of accessibility of code. WordPress is ugly code. there is no arguing that. Everyone who looks at WordPress code, who has looked at any other clean Laravel, Symfony, any other nice code base, looks at WordPress and goes, oh God, this is ugly. I don't want to touch it. WordPress is deeply legacy. It was started before I was a professional developer. It shows. It's got some terrible old code. But it does have explicit provisions in their coding standard to increase code accessibility. Now, personally, for my own style, all of these things I hate. Tabs instead of spaces. I'm a spaces man. I've always been a spaces man. My father was a spaces. I grew up in the spaces minds and Anyway, they explicitly say tabs over spaces because of the ability to have variable tab width. If you're a low vision developer and you need to have a larger font size, just not blind, but low vision, you might need to run a larger font size, and everything is indented by 4 spaces. That means you have anywhere from 4 to 8 or many, many characters less visible on the screen. If you have variable tab width, you can knock that down to 2. You can still see the differentiation in lines and you can fit more code on the screen at once. And I'm sure there's other reasons there as well. Once again, research is flaky, but this is what they've said, and that's their reasoning behind it. No short arrays. They prefer the long array function instead of the short square brackets, explicitly because for new and low vision users, it is easier to identify the word array than it is to identify a square bracket from a curly or a rounded brace, whatever you want to call it. The word. Parens. And spaces and braces. So if you look at all of the if statements, for statements, functions, everything else, there is parenthesis, space, and then the condition, and then another space, then the closing parenthesis. So there is a clear break between the parenthesis and the actual important code. And it gives you a nice little bit of visual gap for people who are hard of vision or just don't really understand how to write code, or maybe just are working in a system where they don't have syntax highlighting or all those nice fun bits and pieces. And that's a large part of why WordPress does this. Accessible code isn't just for experienced developers. WordPress is probably one of the largest open source projects on the planet, with the most eyes on it out of any other project that I've seen, because it's used by amateurs. It's used by people who don't have IDEs set up. They're not running PHP Storm. They're just trying to copy and paste little bits of code, and they kind of understand. And it's a terrible thing, but it's a terrible thing for us professional developers who have to debug it, I should say, but it's a beautiful thing for getting more people into writing code at all and getting things done. So that's it. That's why WordPress has this. WordPress is, as I said, one of the largest code bases in terms of actual direct users of the code. And these coding standards extend to plugins, themes, all of that type of stuff, or at least are meant to. And it's written so that people who have accessibility issues, even if that includes just being new to coding, can access the code more easily and make fewer mistakes and understand what's going on a little bit better. So the summary is, when you're writing code, try to be conscious about your code. Try and create consistency through your entire code base. That means don't pick one coding style for JavaScript and a different one for PHP. You want something that looks very similar. You don't want to be switching between one true brace style and some other brace style and 2 different pieces of project or on different systems. Try to be as consistent as possible. Don't rely just on tools to make your mess usable. You may not always have access to syntax highlighting or an IDE that understands how to break out arrays or anything else. Consistent, readable code helps people, all types of people with all types of disabilities, including juniors and other people who are new to the code base, or even just speak a different language, anything else where they don't think exactly like you. Having a kind of, for public code, at the very least, for public code, try your hardest to make something that's readable and consistent. And it's okay that the code looks ugly to you. We can't all be purists. We can all try to be purists. Sometimes the ugly code is still objectively better when you consider the accessibility of the code for other people. In your own internal projects, have the cleanest, prettiest code you've ever seen. But as soon as you're starting to write code that has to be consumed by people outside of your organization, and even if you're writing code which has to be consumed by a lot of people inside your organization, maybe think about, it could be a little bit uglier, but if it's a bit easier to use for some people, then that's not a bad trade-off. And remember that your users aren't your only users. Even if you never click a single link on the interface of your site, you're still a user of the system because you're touching the code base. Any questions?
Where does PSR 12 sit with this? Because that's what I would have thought. That
PSR 12, much like PSR 12, much like PSR 2, have made absolutely no mention of accessibility. Basically, no one has. That's apart from WordPress, which was the surprise for me, and I can understand why they had to approach it, because they bloody well had to. They had so many people all over the world, not just within Automatic, but so many people touching the code base, they had to actually consciously think about it. Most of the code standards that I've seen, your PSR2, PSR12, and a lot of the other ones that I've seen, don't explicitly talk about it because I guess they're written by people who don't have the problems that, and everyone else just kind of works around it. Which is kind of the core problem with accessibility in the first place. Because we're all so damn bad at it, people have had to write the tools to work around our lazy mess. And that's not a great way to work. It just makes life harder for a few people, so we can be lazy and have arguments over tabs over or spaces or holy walls over nothing really.
Did you come across any like coding standard, like an easy like code sniffer rule, something you can add on that just like gives you all of the rules that improve accessibility or anything like that?
WordPress has their own published coding standard for PHPCS. They have their whole set up rules. Once again, it makes objectively ugly code, but it's objectively ugly for a particular reason, and it's kind of worthwhile there. Okay. Anything else?
I'll tell you more of an anecdote, but I worked with a colleague that was colorblind.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at CI results, he used to really struggle to find errors and things because he couldn't see just some red text.
Exactly.
But interestingly, what worked for him was making the background color really bright. So it was like green, for log lines that were successful, and really bright red, which actually was really hard for everyone else to see because of the extreme contrast. And so it took us about 6 months to kind of end up like working out, striking the balance between what worked for him. I think we had another person as well that was the same problems, but it was like, yeah, it was really hard to find that balance because, what worked for him didn't work for us, like you're saying with code sort of as well.
And yeah, this stretches into the whole backend system. So in case anyone on the stream didn't hear that, CI processes where red and green isn't a good differentiator for whether something has passed or failed, because people who are colorblind can't really see the difference between red and green. I believe 2 meetups ago, Loren came and had a talk, and one of the key points there was don't just use color to differentiate status. We have so many icons and all sorts of things at our disposal now. Having an icon there which is visible and recognizable is probably a much better way of saying this passed or failed, and it's scannable without having to look at color.
Even just like success versus failure.
Yeah.
Like success is 6, 7 letters
versus
like if you're going past fail, they're like, and you look at a Unicode like thing lining up, they're just whole way down. So.
Yeah.
You know, success and failure do too.
Yeah, but success and fail.
Success.
Yeah, you can have success and you effed up.
Good, no good.
Yeah. So do we have any questions from?
CI fail.
Not that I can say that.
All we have on YouTube is Ben Hood suggesting that tabs are the way to go. Which
I mean, like that's the thing.
Don't get started with the editor conversation, please. Don't go down that road.
That's the thing. As I said, those standards in WordPress to me they're subjectively wrong. They're not how I like. Well, subjectively, they're not what I consider to be clean code, but I can understand why they exist, and that's the closest thing to an actual argument that I've heard in the holy war of tabs versus spaces, and it's the only thing that's maybe going to turn me at some point. At some point, maybe.
So you haven't changed all your code yet?
No. No one consumes my code but me.
also
You say that now.
I know, exactly. That's my point.
You just see.
Yeah, if anyone wants to look at my train wreck of slides, I'll be up on that URL now-ish. And yeah, that's about it.
Good.
Over to Tom.
Thank you, Sam. All right. I was originally going to screen share to show the pizza winners, but then I realized it's probably a faux pas to just put people's email addresses on a live stream that gets recorded onto YouTube.
Why is it frozen?
I don't know.
Did Zoom just crash?
Like it's just my face anyway. I'm not showing anything. I think we're still on Zoom. Everything's fine. So I'm just going to go ahead.
Don't put email addresses up.
Yeah. So thanks to our sponsors, we're able to do 10 $15 vouchers from Prezi. So Prezi is just like a universal gift card. Well, not really universal, but a lot of different providers. We're fine.
It's okay. Right,
It doesn't really matter. I'm not really showing anything. So we've got 10 vouchers to give away. So going down the list, so these are going to be sent out to you by email. I'm not going to actually physically give them or actually mail them out to anyone. So going top to bottom, Trent Steele, Max Snow, Josh Fry, Ben Freck, Mike Healy. Heard a yes in the crowd. Say crowd, it's 9 people. Sam Sargent, Patrick Dorrell, Ben Hood, although he did say tabs. No, we'll give it to him anyway. Mick Mack and Roman. Thank you all for playing. Thanks for coming along. A big thanks to all our sponsors as well. Info Exchange, Credit Sense, Neto, Higher IQ. Thanks for a great night. I don't really know how you end a live stream, so.
I think.